All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I will say welcome again, everybody, to our Ticket Training Tuesdays, where we talk about different concepts within Tikit. Today, as you can see, we'll be talking about life cycles. Last week, Jackson talked about templates, and I'm going to be talking about life cycles, which are actually a component of templates within Tikit. And so we'll just kind of dive deep into that. Hopefully not too deep, though. I do have a demo, and it's fairly chunky, so hopefully I don't lose anybody. Couple of housekeeping things first. The session is being recorded and will be posted, I believe, to YouTube after the fact. And anybody feel free to come off mute at any time, ask questions, give feedback, anything like that. We're happy to hear from you. We want to engage you guys when we can. But first, obviously, I will be going through what is a life cycle. Just one more note about Ticket Training Tuesday. We do this every week. Let us know what you like about what we're doing so far. If there's a session that you'd like to see, let us know about that. There is a link to our previous sessions. If Jeff, if you could grab that for me, the help page on that. Yeah, there's, like I said, a schedule of upcoming sessions and what we've done so far with links to the recording, etc. So let us know what you'd like to see. Thanks for that, Jeff. All right. And then I will just give a quick intro about myself. I'm a consultant here at Sierson. I deliver professional services across all of our products, including Tikit, and that includes implementation and customization and process build-outs and things like that in the context of Tikit. Right, so let's get into what is a life cycle. So last week with templates, Jackson mentioned that life cycles are a way to streamline a particular business process, and he gave the example of onboarding, so that's what I'll be demoing today. But first, I want to talk about kind of what life cycles are in Tikit and how they help facilitate executing a business process. So from a technical perspective, life cycle is a collection of what we call phases and transitions. Phases are a phase of work in a business process that can contain tasks or approvals. And a phase of work in our onboarding example would be something like new account creation, right? That might be a typical step in an onboarding business process. And so that would be a phase. Approval of that new employee would also be a potential phase. And then transitions are triggers at the end of each phase that can control the flow of the business process. So as that phase completes, there's a transition that's going to tell the life cycle whether to continue on to the next phase or to jump to a different phase, which I'm going to show some of that too, just to hopefully spark you guys' imagination in terms of building phases. So they're not just going to go in order, although that's a perfectly valid method of executing a business process, is just move through the phases one by one. And as a matter of fact, the default transition does just that when a phase is complete and moves to the next phase. But I'm going to show some of the jumping around that is possible, so you can actually build resiliency in your life cycle if one of the phases goes kind of sideways. And then from a more philosophical perspective, life cycles are here to streamline business processes. They allow for standardizing the tasks and approvals across instances of a particular business process. They reduce the repetitive work in the form of adding the same task or approval to each ticket, and they increase consistency by ensuring the process is followed the same way every time. So we can add ad hoc tasks and approvals to our existing tickets, but the life cycle contains tasks and approvals that are the same across every instance of a particular process, like onboarding. We always want approval. We always want, the account creation process, et cetera. So those are part of the ticket, part of the life cycle every time. And so you've got consistency across every instance of that business process. So before I go to the demo, which is kind of where I'm at, does anybody have any questions from a philosophical or technical perspective about what life cycles are? I'm going to take that as a note. So I'm going to stop sharing the deck and try to share my screen. Can everybody see my screen share? Should be seeing the ticket grid. Okay, perfect. Thanks for the thumbs up. Appreciate that. So life cycles, like I said, a life cycle is a set of phases and transitions. And actually, if you expand your life cycle, I'm in settings, life cycles, by the way, in Tikit. If you expand even from here, you can see both the phases and the transitions. And I'm going to dig into this one here in just a moment, but I just wanted to highlight the fact that you can see kind of all the components of a particular life cycle. And this one, like I said, is onboarding. And so the first phase is going to be this setup process. And as you can see over here, it's got a Power Automate task. I'm not going to go too deep into the Power Automate tasks because we actually have a session about that next week. Ben is going to be delivering a session around Power Automate tasks and what's possible with those, but they are in fact a component of a life cycle. And so I just wanted to highlight all the available options you have for a life cycle, and Power Automate task is one of those. So in my process, I'm using a Power Automate task / flow to kind of lay out some of the items of my ticket and actually part of the life cycle as well. And so that's why I have automation in the first phase. The next phase is approval, which is going to go to HR, and then that phase contains an approval task, if you will. We just simply call it an approval, but is part of my approval phase. And then the next is create the new account, which once again is a Power Automate task. I don't have to go too deep into that, but just know that this phase actually does go to Power Automate, create a new account. And actually, you can see here I have a couple of transitions, which I spoke about earlier. One that says if the account creation fails, it's going to take a different action than if the phase just completes naturally. And then same with success, it's actually going to push it onto the next phase, but not in the normal default way because I have this transition, the failed one, and I need to account for both of those states. So that's why I have two transitions here. Same thing with my order new hardware. This is going to be a manual step, so I've used a task, and once again, either the hardware is ordered successfully and we complete and move on to the last phase actually, or if there's an issue with the hardware order, this transition is going to kick in and it's actually going to move to this phase, which just happens to be the next phase, but I've called it manual intervention. So just backing up one step, if both of these complete successfully, we're never going to go to this step, which would be the ideal outcome. But if either one of them have an issue, either one of them will send me to this step. And then, as you can see, I have a transition for any errors from the above phases are resolved. It's going to transition one way, and if they were unable to be resolved, it's going to transition another, which is actually ultimately going to fail the entire life cycle, and then thus the ticket. And then finally, I have a Power Automate task that just does, once again, some cleanup and actually completes and resolves the ticket. So that is what my phase looks like. I'm going to go ahead and drill into it so we can kind of see what it looks like in here. Once again, I said I've got the Power Automate task in this in the setup phase. Like I said, I don't want to go too deep into Power Automate tasks because Ben is going to talk about those next week, but I will show the transition. Once that task is complete, it's going to use this default logic, which just says when everything is completed in this phase, which setup is my phase, then it's going to move on. It's just going to move on to the next phase. And in this one, that phase is a approval. And once again, it's going to use the default logic. So as soon as Diego approves this new hire, it's going to move on to the next phase, which is create new account. And this is the one that I kind of highlighted earlier that has two transitions, one for the Power Automate task fails. And what it's going to do is, as I've already said, it's going to move to phase manual intervention. But if it succeeds, Power Automate task, create new account succeeded, then it's going to move to the next phase. And once again, just want to highlight, the default logic would typically handle this account where, the Power Automate task succeeded or all tasks succeeded. But I did have to do this one kind of manually to move to the next phase because of this transition, because both transitions are going to fire. But because this logic isn't satisfied, or excuse me, this logic isn't satisfied, it's just going to move on to the next one, and this logic will be satisfied, thus moving to the next phase. Same thing with order new hardware. If that's successful, it's going to go on and complete that task and move to actually the final phase, not the next phase, because in this case, the next phase is manual intervention. So we're actually going to jump that phase and go to complete. If there's an issue, it's going to move to the same phase. It's going to move to the manual intervention phase, just like the account creation process did. And then in the manual intervention phase, it's just a single task that I say, yep, I was able to resolve those errors. And if that's the case, then the fix errors task is completed, and that's going to move on. That's actually going to move back. So in the manual intervention phase, I'm going to start the process over. It's going to go back up to the approval and start all over. And I've got notifications so that when they get a new approval, they know why they're being asked to approve again. But that just kind of lets me start the process all over again, and it's a good stopping place. So I don't go from that manual task back to this automated task that failed in the first place. So I just want to make sure everything's been, caught and fixed, and Diego has had a chance to approve that. And then finally, like I said, the complete phase just runs a Power Automate flow once again that just does a little bit of cleanup. And then once that is complete, it's actually going to resolve the ticket. So I know that was a lot, and I'm actually going to create a ticket off the back of that. But while I'm doing that, does anybody have any questions? No questions so far. All right, so I'm going to submit this new hire process. He's going to start next week. I'll submit that. And then we're going to look at the ticket as it's moving through these different phases. So 242 was created. I'm going to go here and refresh. There's my new hire. Part of my first phase here, the setup phase, is actually going to, excuse me, excuse me. It's going to change the title. So I'm going to give this a refresh, and hopefully that Power Automate task is going to just complete successfully and move on. And if it does, then we should have a new title, which is going to include the person's name. I got a life cycle here. Could be that, oh, it did, it succeeded. So we should be moving on any second now. You can see here too that the title changed. That was a result of that Power Automate flow running. Once again, I don't want to get into the weeds around, kind of what that looks like, but because Ben's going to cover that next week. But we should see the phase move on now. Yeah, you can see now that the setup phase occurred successfully, which is great. And now we're in the approval phase. And I added a comment here as a part of that flow as well, so that when this approval goes to the HR person, Diego, he's able to see the last comment and kind of have context for what he's approving. And if I'm going to approve this for Diego off screen, but just know that Diego is approving that, which is, as we showed earlier, there's only one approval inside this phase, which means it's going to move on to the next. So, and I can hear, if you see TVA down here, it's going crazy. Approval request has been approved. That was Diego. And so if we look here again, we should see it moving on. We may not even get to see it do the account creation phase, because that may happen faster than I can get refreshed. Okay, it is. That's where it's at. If we look inside the life cycle, we can see the setup phase completed. The approval was approved by Diego. Now we're in this phase. Hopefully that's running in the background off in Power Automate. But you can see the different types of tasks that are contained within each of the phases, that are part of the definition of the life cycle, and they're just running like they're supposed to. So far, so good. And I'm actually going to cause the order process to fail, because I just want to show kind of that resiliency that is possible. Just want to note too that you do have to take a little bit more manual, there's a little bit of manual work to kind of set up and mitigate any issues in your life cycle, but it is possible to build a resilient life cycle that, like I said, will start back over at any point that you want to, any phase that you want to, and allow you to kind of go through a life cycle again, as it were, if there was an issue. So hopefully this is gonna finish. We'll give a note too that it could be running slowly because of the Azure issues that are happening with Microsoft. So we have been affected by that as well. We know there's been customers that have been affected by the Azure issues. So that could be where I'm at. I'm gonna just have a quick peek over here to see if this is running or stuck or what's going on. Oh, it failed. Outstanding. So it didn't even get to the point where it could actually, in my flow, I have it setting this task as failed. I set the task status as failed or succeeded, but it didn't even reach that point before it failed. So this is pretty well broken. Let me just see why it failed. This was working yesterday. I don't know why it's failed now. Goodness. Oh. Let me try this, actually. So this is part of when the ticket goes sideways. This is why we build this resilient process, so that you can actually not just have a ticket stuck in a single phase. So I'm actually going to resubmit this, and it should get on past it, actually. Once again, don't want to go too deep into the flow itself. There we go. So I was able to actually resubmit that flow, and it succeeded. So it moved on to the next phase, which is order new hardware. Here's somebody come off mute. Is there a question? No? Okay. So this wasn't, when this failed, this actually wasn't quite the resiliency I wanted to show, because the task itself didn't actually fail. Now it's actually successfully completed. So I am going to still go ahead and fail this one. And so as soon as that fails, the transition should trigger that we saw earlier. That's going to send it to this manual intervention step. So if I refresh one more time, we see it is in manual intervention, right? Could not order hardware was the reason that we're here. So if I click into that phase, I'm going to say, oh, here we go. Okay, fix errors. I need to fix the errors, whatever the issue was. This is all theoretical, hypothetical, right? So there was an issue ordering. I've now fixed that issue. So I'm going to complete this task in the manual intervention phase of fix errors. And like I said earlier, if we looked at the transitions in my life cycle, it's going to take us back up here to the approval phase. And I hear, yeah, Diego just got the request for approval. I can hear it going off, which means our transition did what we hoped it would. And you can see now we're back in the approval phase. So we went from here to here, failed here, went here, and now we've gone back here because this has been resolved. So this time, Diego's going to approve. Once again, approving off screen. Apologies for that. I just want to make sure I just show this window. So now that Diego's approved, I'm going to refresh this one more time. You can also see, and I'll show it again because I've kind of brushed past it, but in the activity log, you can see where Lifecycles is resetting all the activity on each of the phases. So here you can see Lifecycle is transitioned to phase approval. This is after the manual intervention phase was completed, and then it reset the votes, right? That means that it's going to need approval again. Diego approved it. It transitioned to create new account. It reset the status back to, its original status, which is, I think, pending. And now the automation has completed. And so this is already successful. So when I refresh here, we're going to see it in the order new hardware. Which is where we're at, order new hardware, transition to that phase, reset that task because we'd already set it to failed. I'm going to drill in to that phase, which takes me to my order hardware task, which I'm actually going to complete this time. And like I said before, we're going to skip this manual intervention step now and jump to complete, which is automation once again, and it's going to resolve my ticket for me. And there we go. You can see that means we jumped from order new hardware, that was successful, and it went to the complete phase, and the complete phase resolved the ticket. So now it's all done, all everything is fulfilled. But once again, with life cycles, the idea is to streamline and achieve consistency across every instance of your process, and in fact build in resiliency where it's needed. Oh. Uh-oh. Well, I did at least get through the bulk of my demo. I think this is the Azure issue. So that's great. Oh, here we go. Maybe. Maybe I can go here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. Crisis averted. We'll just close that one. I did actually want to show one more thing. That life cycle was an awful lot. So if anybody has any questions or comments about that, please feel free to jump in and ask and or comment. Pause real fast. I think we're getting low on time here, so. Okay, I'm gonna move on. I did want to just quickly walk through creating a life cycle. Because that one was all pre-configured, pre-set up, and I just wanted to quickly walk through what it looks like to create a net new life cycle. So I went to settings and lifecycle, clicked new lifecycle. I'm going to do a hardware request. I have a template called hardware request, which just has our out-of-the-box laptop request card. So I'm going to do a very simple approval phase and a very simple implementation, or I'll call it delivery phase. And in my approval phase, obviously I'm going to have a single approval. And I'll just add myself, maybe, just for simplicity's sake. You also can have, we've talked about approvals in the past, but you can have multiple approvals, and you can require a response from all recipients. I'll go ahead and do that here. And then once the approval is approved, it's just going to do the default transition and move on to the next phase. And in this phase, we're going to add purchase and deliver hardware. You could break these up into multiple phases. Like purchase would be one, delivery would be another. That's probably the way I would typically approach it, because you want to tie each individual task to a particular phase. So number one, people know where they're at in the process, both from an end user and from an agent perspective. But also just, once again, consistency, streamline. But just for time's sake, I'm just going to do one task. And then it's got the default transition as well. I'll show that default transition logic. And then when this life cycle completes, it's going to change the status to resolved. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Once you create a life cycle, you will need to stick it into a template, which I do have a pre-created template here for hardware request. So I am going to attach the life cycle that I've just created for hardware request to my hardware request template, save that, and I have this wired up with a KB, so that when I go into Tikit Virtual Agent, I can just say hardware request. Oh, not help. There we go. That's just, like I said, our out-of-the-box standard hardware request form in Tikit. So I'll just submit that request real quick, watching the time. All right, so Tikit 243 was created. There's our hardware request. And you can see the life cycle was successfully applied. Got my approval and my delivery. If I click on the life cycle tab, there I have to approve. And once again, Diego has to approve, which I've just done once again off screen. If we go back to the activity, we should see I approved. Give it a quick refresh. I know we are at time. Approval request has been approved. Both of us have approved. So it's moved on. Now we're in the delivery phase. And then once I complete that, that will complete this ticket. Once again, I just wanted to go through the entire process, kind of end to end, of how you create one. I showed a very complex one early, and I, went through each one of those phases step by step, and the transitions as well. But I wanted to show you, like, if you have a simple process, it's not too difficult to just build a life cycle out, attach it to an existing template, or create a new template just for that process, and attach the life cycle to it. So with that, I will stop sharing, and I will ask one more time, is there any questions, comments, feedback?
Justin, this is Kareem, manager over at Comline. I just wanted to commend you and your team for putting on these Ticket Tuesdays. They're very helpful, and the fact that you leave the recordings on your website is really very critical. So we can go over it again and again. So I really wanted to thank you, and the engagement. I don't think in my career I've had such engagement from a ticketing vendor. So I just want to put that comment out there.
Cool. We really, really appreciate that, Kareem. Thanks for jumping off mute and giving that feedback. Really appreciate it.
Anytime. Anytime.
Cool. All right. Like I said, we are at time, actually a minute over. So happy to answer any more questions. If you guys have questions, feel free to reach out, help@tikit.ai, or you can email me directly, justin.workman@syerson.com. Love to hear from you guys. Like I said, if you've got feedback about sessions you want to hear, sessions you want to see, anything you want to see, let us know. Happy to try to, build content that works for you guys. Come back next week and watch as Ben goes through Power Automate tasks. Thanks, everybody.